Welcome everyone to a new episode of On the Rise. My name is Vishal Yathish. On the Rise features top-tier founders, innovators, and now investors to talk about their journeys and motivations to help inspire the next generation of leaders. Today, we're joined by Kat Mañalac. Kat is a partner at Combinator, a top startup accelerator, which has backed companies like Airbnb, Instacart, and Stripe. And as you guys can see, I'm so excited. Hi, Kat. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's dive right in. Would you mind sharing more about your background and how you got started at YC?
Yeah. So right after college, I wasn't one of those people that always knew what they wanted to do. I was actually always very jealous of those people. But the way that I've always operated is sort of like figuring out like what is particularly of interest to me and who do I want to work with. So right after college, I worked at Wired magazine. And while I was at Wired, this was like 2008, there were a bunch of startups launching like Kickstarter, Airbnb, and I got to meet some of those early stage, Airbnb and Kickstarter founders. And I fell in love with startups while I was there. They were so fast moving. It seemed like the future. It was like young people who were interested in like building world changing things, which is all super interesting to me. And I also at Wired, Reddit had actually been acquired by Wired's parent company. So we were all working out of the same office. So I'd have lunch every day with like the 5 Reddit guys. Reddit at that time was only 5 people. And I'd talk to Alexis Ohanian, the founder of Reddit, and I'd pitch him my startup ideas. We'd kind of like go back and forth on things. And at a certain point, I was like, hey, like, what do you think I should do after, Wired had been there for almost 4 years. And he said, you should go start a startup or you should join one. And I'm sure you've already learned this. Meeting startup people, they become startup pushers. So they want everybody to start a startup because it may, change their lives so much. So I started interviewing startups, and a lot of them were early YC startups. And then Alexis at some point said, hey, why don't you join me as my chief of staff? You can help me sort of do, any project we want to do. He had an angel fund at that point and a nonprofit. So I helped him sort of do both. And I was like, yeah, that's awesome. And at the time, my parents didn't know what Reddit was, and they didn't know who Alexis was either. And so they were like, is he paying you? Are you getting like a check? Like, do you have like, is the money in your bank account? Like, they didn't think it was a real job. And so I worked with Alexis for a couple of years and then eventually started as YC's first director of outreach. Alexis had told me like, okay, YC's looking for someone to do outreach to potential founders. And it is exactly you. You should talk to them. And so I talked to Paul and Jessica, sort of loved the vision for what they wanted to do with YC and how they wanted to grow YC. And so I started at YC in 2013. So it's almost been 9 years now.
That's really awesome. And it's great to hear how like Alexis Ohanian helped you grow on that journey. Just out of curiosity, how has your role as a partner evolved since you started, and particularly during quarantine?
Yeah. So, my role has evolved quite a bit since I started, but I've always been involved in outreach. And back when I started, and even today, that means outreach to potential applicants. So, everything that YC puts out to encourage more people to apply. And I remember when I first started at YC, Paul and Jessica said, okay, most people who hear about YC come in through knowing PG's essays or reading Founders at Work, which was Jessica Livingston's book, or through Hacker News. So it's a very specific demographic of person. So they said, if we had one person thinking about where to reach out to smart, hardworking people around the world who haven't thought about even starting a startup yet, like what could that do for YC? Like what, you would be our growth team of one. So I was very focused on sort of founder, like we used to do, Startup School used to be a 1-day conference that we used to do. We used to do just a couple college, a college tour, which would be like a few schools that we visit a year. And so since then, I've been able to really like expand the universe of things that we do at YC to encourage people to start companies and hopefully encourage them to apply to YC as well. So I very much focused on that in the beginning. I was a group partner for, a few batches. And then recently YC, when I started at YC, it was maybe 10 people full-time, maybe not even. And these days we're, over 80 people. So I lead a team now. And so my team does we take charge of like press, we help companies launch, we do content like video, blog posts, essays, for YC partners, and then also like social media. So everything sort of externally that you see at YC is like part of our team responsibility. And so now I think, the job has expanded more to like managing a team of people who can like carry out all of the YC's ethos essentially, and so it's been really cool growing a team over the past couple of years. During the pandemic, honestly, it hasn't changed that much. The biggest difference, so I am part of the all of YC's group partners, visiting partners, and executives are part of the application reading and interview process. So we read all the applications that come into YC. So that's like 15,000 plus applications every 6 months, and then we interview the companies. And so that whole process has gone online, and actually like remote interviews is working really well, we find. And so that's been the biggest change, I think, is like doing everything remotely, doing less in person, and figuring out like how do you connect and how do you read founders and teams in accurate ways, even just over Zoom. So it's been an interesting, I think as the pandemic recedes, parts of YC will go back in person, but interviews specifically works so well online. That might be something that for the most part is always done online.
Yeah. And what you said just like a few seconds ago was really interesting about how you don't imagine YC as like a business growing from a group of really small people to like 80 plus. So that was a really interesting perspective. Just following up on something that you mentioned. So YC is the best startup accelerator in the world, and you receive 15,000 applications per batch. What is the secret to YC's success in your opinion?
Oh man, I get this question a lot. And I think, first of all, I think Paul and Jessica, the founders of YC, really set a really incredible blueprint. They set up the program. They were well respected even prior to YC. Paul wrote, Hackers and Painters, which I highly recommend reading if you guys haven't read it yet, or PG's essays online. And Jessica wrote Founders at Work, which interviewed a lot of the like Web 1.0 or early founders of companies about best practices. And so the very first batch of YC only had 8 companies, but it had the founders of what became Reddit, what became Twitch. It had Sam Altman, who later became the president of YC. So since the very beginning, I think YC's had an incredible community. And I think Jessica specifically was really good at figuring out how to like build this community in this organic way and to make helpfulness a huge part of the YC ethos. So at the beginning of each batch, we always tell the founders, hey, for the 3 months you're in YC, use up all the resources like partner time, reach out to alumni for help, ask people for introductions, like use as many YC resources as possible. But know that after you graduate YC, people are going to come, future founders are going to come to you and ask for help with their applications. They'll ask for help with, getting over specific problems. And so I think that, building a really good community and then baking in that culture of helpfulness is I think probably YC's secret sauce at this point. And we have over 6,000 founders in the community, and many are founders of, 100 million plus valuation companies. So it's a great network to be part of.
And touching on that, can you walk us through some of the factors that go into whether a startup gets accepted into YC or not? Like, do you try to balance across, for example, geographical regions or sectors or stages? Yeah, I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. We never try to be too smart about what's going to be the next big thing. And one of the reasons I think is that when Airbnb pitched YC, way back in the day, everybody thought it was a stupid idea. Like Paul Graham's, I think his initial comment was like, what is wrong with people? They want to sleep on an air mattress in someone else's house? Like, that's crazy. And so we don't try to predict, what's going to be the next big thing where, but what we do know is that strong founders and strong teams build incredible billion-dollar, world impacting companies. And we're so early in the process that we really dig into the team. And so I think what we look for is we look for a team that can build. So ideally, if it's a software product, ideally you have someone who can build software on the team. If it's hardware, ideally you have someone with hardware experience. We look for a team that has clarity of vision so that they can clearly explain what they're doing and why. Like, what are they building and who are they building it for and what problems are they solving? Ideally, we look for folks that have like some insight. Like, what is the insight that you have that others who are trying to solve the same problem don't have? And and I think another thing is speed. Like, how fast is this team moving? Is this a team that's biased toward action? Have they been working on it 2 months, but already have a prototype, have already talked to like potential customers. So we love to see teams that are biased towards action and speedy and quick to iterate based on feedback. And everything else is sort of, we know ideas can change. We get a lot of people who are at the early stages who pivot completely. And so we're really looking at that early stage team and like, why do we think this team will stick together too? Like, do we believe these founders have a relationship outside of just wanting to start a startup? Like, do we believe that they know how to communicate well with each other and that they're both in it for the long haul? So those are some of the things we look at, and there are like probably 1,000 data points in every application that we get. And so we're constantly, you get pretty good at like sifting through them and then figuring out like, what are the red flags? And so I think all the people who read YC applications are very optimistic. And so I think that's a key in a key trait of application readers is like, we're pretty optimistic people, both like about the future and about teams. And but yeah, that's in a nutshell what we're looking for.
And that leads right into my next question. So obviously you've worked with thousands of YC startups, the best of the best. What are some of the founder traits, specifically soft skills, that you think made them successful? And is there an example you can highlight?
Yeah, I mean, other than, as I mentioned, like building and having that bias toward action, I really think that like this like ability to clearly state your vision, having that clarity of vision and ability to communicate it so that a 5-year-old can understand what you're building. I think that's really important. And that's important when you're, especially if you're very technical or if you're very scientific, like if you come from an academic or scientific background. And I think it's important to get those like communication skills down so that when you're talking about what you're building to potential co-founders or investors or potential users or say the press, like even if the people that you're talking to aren't from your academic background or from your industry, that they'll have a clear sense of what you're building and the problem you're solving and why. And so I think it's, I was talking to Breck, the founders of Brex recently, and they talked a lot about how writing culture is important. And so like the ability to write clearly and succinctly, even if you're extremely technical, is important, especially in remote companies, because in remote companies, you need a lot of documentation, not just, the code documentation, but documentation of your processes and your culture and the way you think. And so I think having those writing skills is super important for anyone. And then, like, I think great founders, like, their job after fundraising and product market fit, it really becomes like managing people and recruiting and like building your team. And so I think, some of the skills that like some of the best founders have been in like recruiting and finding the best people and inspiring them too, to a certain extent, to like solve the problem that they're solving as well.
And a lot of our audience are young students who want to start their own companies. What would be your advice to them on how to start going about this, and when, in your opinion, is the right time to found a startup?
Yeah, I talked to a lot of founders who are still in school, and I think that for the vast majority of people, I'd say like graduate, right? Like use the time. Like you will never be around so many hardworking, ambitious, smart people in your life, especially if you go to like a good university or a university that you end up loving. And it's like very rare after university to be surrounded by those many smart people in such a small space. So I would say use the time during school to really meet those people, like meet potential co-founders, potential people that you might want to hire in the future. And then, use that time to also figure out, what problems that you want to solve and whether a startup is for you. Like my suggestion is always to as someone who didn't know what they wanted to do in school, I did a lot of experimentation. Like I interned at, companies of different sizes. I actually briefly tried to start a startup in college. I did all the things. And so I think that gave me a slightly more informed take on, I knew at a certain point, shortly after graduating, that I did not want to work for a big company, that it was too slow moving and just I didn't want to be one of many cogs. I wanted to be at a fast moving place that I could actually have impact in. So yeah, I would say that if you aren't 100% sure on the idea yet, there's so much you can do to kind of test your hypotheses for things. And meet the people that you want to meet. If there is an idea that you absolutely know you want to work with, then I would say start building it and start recruiting potential co-founders and get people excited to work with you on it. And then, launch it as quickly as possible to get that feedback. You can even apply to YC. I think the youngest founder we've ever funded was 15 years old. I think he was 16 maybe, and his parents had to fill out our paperwork and move to the Bay Area with the team. But I would say for most people, I think it's totally fine to spend that time in school, building those kind of skills and building that community.
And you've talked a lot about how launching a startup should not be one singular event, and how startups should launch as soon as they have a working MVP and continue iterating with user feedback. I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on this topic for those who haven't been lucky enough to see your talks.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I did this talk, so I did a talk for Startup School that if you haven't seen it yet, you can check it out. It's about launching again and again. And it's one of the big mistakes we see founders make, even founders in YC. A lot of really smart, hardworking people are, you might not be surprised by this, perfectionists. So they spend way too much time trying to perfect the product and also perfect their launch. And so everybody has previously thought of the launch as this one moment in time where you pitch press and you launch on all the social networks and everybody is excited about what you do. But these days, there are tens of companies that launch every single day. It's hard to make yourself heard. So Airbnb, for example, they like to say that they launched 3 times before anyone started paying attention to them. They would have 1 or 2 users that came from each launch, and they'd get a press hit, and they were excited by being in the news, and their moms were excited, but nobody actually cared other than, their moms for the most part. So I would say that, think about this as just you can launch on a weekly basis if you have to, launch on, take the earliest version of your product, launch to friends and family, launch to, on Hacker News, especially if it's a software product. You can launch on Product Hunt. You can launch on all sorts of platforms these days and get that early feedback and improve it a little before you do your next launch, which could be as soon as next week. So yeah, I want people not to spend 6 months to a year perfecting everything, because that first launch, you'll be lucky if 10 people pay attention and start using your product. And so just think of it as something you can continuously do.
And if you want to hear more about Kat's thoughts on this topic, check out YC Startup School. It's an amazing resource. I know I benefited significantly from it. So starting the last batch, I believe, YC has increased the amount it invests in admitted startups from 125 to 500K, I believe. You can fact check my numbers if that's not right. What made you make that decision, and why now?
So it's actually something that we've been thinking about for a while and for years, potentially, wanting to give a better, deal to YC founders in terms of giving them more funding. We wanted to give folks more funding so they didn't have to immediately start thinking about fundraising as soon as the batch started. We want them to be as focused on building product and talking to users for as long as possible. And especially, I think for companies in the hard sciences or bio, this gives them a lot more runway to just focus on product and milestones and building before they have to go out to investors. So I think that's, why we wanted to do it. And also I think it's cool because founders of every background, socioeconomic background, academic background, they can apply to YC and know that they'll have, even if they don't have savings, built up, they have enough coming from YC that they can just simply focus on product for a specific amount of time. The why now is really because in 2021, and I have to fact check my numbers on this, we had incredible success. Like we had over 10 companies IPO or go public. And it's just, YC is about 16 years old now. And I think, we were like, we sort of parlayed that success into, raising funds to give our founders an even better deal. And so I think it was the right timing for us on that end as well. It's like we were able to take the great success that our alumni have, built for the community and really parlay it into this.
And you were extremely thoughtful on how YC Demo Day is run, and which is an amazing event, by the way, and trying to connect founders to the right investors. How do founders best attract early stage investors?
Yeah. So this is not to sound cliche, but I think the best way to attract the best investors is to build something people want, which is YC's motto. And so is to make something people want. And so I think in an ideal world, in a utopian world for founders, they've built something that users are loving. They're building traction, and you don't even really need investor money. So, and in that case, investors always come to you like that. And that's the dream is that you have investors proactively reaching out to you. Maybe they saw you through Product Hunt or a Hacker News launch, and they see that, you're really responding well to your users and you're iterating, you're building something people want. That's the dream. I think a lot of people really appreciate YC because YC is this community now of 6,000 founders and thousands of investors. And you can really lean on something like Demo Day to introduce you to that network of investors, and also the alumni community of YC. A lot of them are investors now too. Many of them are very successful founders who are now paying it forward and angel investing in a ton of YC, the younger YC companies. And then also YC alumni often introduce each other to their investors. So I think, other than building an incredible product and gaining traction, which anyone, even, obviously without YC can do, I would say really lean on your sort of networks if you have them, and to get these introductions to great investors who might not yet have heard about you or what you're building. And then if you don't have, the networks, I would say it's there are a lot of online platforms now. And of course you can apply to YC anytime at any age, which I would definitely recommend. But there are a lot of platforms to get those early users to give you feedback. And sometimes those early users become investors. So I would say that would be my suggestion for how to, get the attention of investors early on.
And YC just closed applications for the summer 22 batch, but they're still accepting late applications. So if you're a founder, make sure to apply. Have you started going through those applications? And if so, was there any interesting trends you noticed evolving as we come into this post-pandemic world? For example, certain sectors that are seeing more innovation than others that YC is looking to double down on.
Yeah. We have started reading applications for summer 2022, but I think it's too early to say what the trends are, sort of what we're seeing in that set of applications. But I can share some from the last batch of YC, which just had Demo Day in March for winter 2022. We did see, I think we do have YC is probably primarily software. I think it was 30% of the companies were B2B. We did see an uptick in crypto-related companies and climate tech-related companies. But I think what we're seeing is sort of a change in who is starting to work on those companies. We're starting to see a lot of folks who are incredibly smart and thoughtful and hardworking, and maybe from other big tech companies, and they're quitting their jobs to, start working in the crypto space or to start building, climate tech. And so we're seeing what I think it's it's less of the fact that we want to double down on it and more of the fact that smart founders are starting to double down in these areas. What's cool about YC applications is that it's sort of like a little bit of a crystal ball. Like one time somebody took 8 years of data from YC applications and compared it to Google Trends. And we're about 18 months ahead of Google Trends. And so like, for example, Coinbase, YC was, funded it in 2012 before really anyone was talking about Bitcoin. And so, yeah, I think we, in this last batch, we saw crypto, we saw, climate tech, we saw a lot of healthcare. And I think that's probably a big impact of the pandemic as well, is like we saw a lot of issues arise in the healthcare space. So a lot of healthcare companies, and during the pandemic, and I'm sure during the pandemic, we also saw a lot of like ed tech companies, because clearly we were there were a lot of broken parts of education and that are coming to light, and so ed tech companies really got a boost. So yeah, I think it's early. I think people are I'm curious to see how all those sort of like remote work, the companies that support remote work and remote education, how those companies will do, like even post pandemic. So yeah, it's early to say for summer, but I'll keep you posted on anything interesting that we see.
That would be really, really cool. So to close this out, one final question. What advice would you give to young student founders who are looking to apply to YC?
All right. So for young student founders, I would say one, start figuring out the problems that you want to solve. Like start figuring out what are the big problems in the world that you've seen in your community or in your own life that you'd like to dedicate maybe the next 5 to 10 years of your life trying to solve and figure out. Second, I would say definitely find the time to work with other people and figure out who you work well with. And maybe you guys might want to start a startup someday, or even, while you're still in school, use this time to find, people that you love spending that time with. And then figure out what technologies you might have to learn to build the products or solve the problems that you need to solve. You'll probably never have as much time to learn those skills as you do now. So I would dig into that. Idea team and learning the tech. And you can apply to YC anytime at any stage. So even if it's, just an idea, or if you have a launched product that you're, interested in starting to grow, I would love to see your applications, and you can always shoot me an email. I'm just Kat@Combinator.
Thank you so much, Kat, for your time. Thanks everyone for joining us. Stay tuned for my next episode and see you all soon. Bye.